Hi there. Good afternoon. Welcome to another session, Rumination with Andrew. I hope that you will have a great time with me as I present this very important topic. Now, this afternoon, we are going to look at Mia Motley and ask the very pivotal question: is Mia Motley the new Michael Manley of the Caribbean? Is Mia Motley, that's the Prime Minister of Barbados, the new Michael Manley of the Caribbean? She's been touted as someone who is an indefatigable leader and advocate for climate change and also for egalitarianism in the world. And wherever you go, particularly in the global south, in Africa, in countries in the Caribbean, people adore her and they think that she's a courageous, brave woman. But is Mia Motley, does she have the tenacity of spirit? Does she have the sincerity and the charisma as Michael Manley had? Now, remember now that when we talk about Michael Manley, we have to look at Michael Manley of the 70s, the 1970s, with his democratic socialism, and Michael Manley of 1989 when he returned to power for his third term as the free marketer and one who had eventually embraced the doctrine of neoliberalism. Now, the thing that we need to understand, and many of our intellectuals are not honest with us, is that the world has changed and the world evolves. And when the world evolves, it takes on new doctrines, right? And new ideologies. And people begin to embrace different philosophies. And we have to understand that. During the Cold War, we had the competition, this very aggressive competition between the Soviets, that's the Soviet Union, and the United States, who were the two major superpowers of the world. And you should understand that by now. And that war was, being waged with great intensity, particularly in the decades of the 60s and the 70s. And Jamaica would have come, just like the other Caribbean nations, they would have been birthed in terms of giving their independence in that time period. Now, the fact of the matter is that having gotten our independence, we forged a different direction in terms of where we're going because England would no longer be our caretakers or caregivers, as it were, not caretakers, but caregivers. And we moved on, so-called, into independence, into treading the road independently, the road of development independently. But what people have not yet really come to grips with is that the United States, which controls the Western Hemisphere through its Monroe Doctrine, would not have had us just been released from Great Britain and just say, wow, they're independent, when the United States had already been engaged in the region. When we think about Haiti, when we think about the Dominican Republic, when we think about Panama, Costa Rica, and many other nations, Colombia, the United States was already operating in these countries and was seeking to cement her full spectrum dominance doctrine and ideology. Now, the thing about it is that Michael Manley came at a time in which he thought that Jamaica was at a critical moment of development, and he was passionate. Give him his credit, he was a passionate advocate for Jamaica's development. He really wanted to see us developed. In fact, he was so anxious that sometimes he ran ahead of himself, and sometimes his policies, his doctrines were not carefully ironed out, were not carefully refined, were not carefully reflected on, and hence, Jamaica found itself in huge problem with the mighty power to the north. Now, Mia Motley did a presentation on Michael Manley 2 weeks ago. She went to Jamaica, and she is the sister-in-law of the one of Jamaica's primary powerful families, the Duncans. And I'm sure that she was invited there by her sister-in-law to give a lecture series on, well, a lecture, I shouldn't say a lecture series, but a lecture on Michael Manley. Now, Mia Motley, based on my understanding, based on the lecture that she gave, is not an academic. She is not a scholar, right? She's a lawyer by training and also a career politician. So she's not one who is going to give you a historical foundation. I thought that her speech was flat. I thought it was boring. I thought that it really was more geared towards promoting herself, possibly as the future General Secretary of the United Nations. But she did not really give us an understanding of Michael Manley's politics. And she might have known him personally, which she said she did, because, he traversed Jamaica, logically Barbados, and he knew personally her family, and she knew him, and he would visit their personal home, their family home. So obviously, Mia Motley knew Prime Minister Michael Manley on a personal level, at a personal level, but she really did not grasp. She doesn't seem to have a deep understanding of Michael Manley, the politician, the Jamaican politician, the global politician, as it were. She did mention that she read his book, The Politics of Change, which is a very beautiful book to read. And I think I've read that book probably 3 times. But the fact of the matter is that she did not delve into the real issues that Michael Manley spoke about. She had the book in her hand, and I think she was speaking extemporaneously, which she likes to do. And when you're speaking about a complex, complicated character, the likes of Michael Manley, you have to prepare your notes. You have to really write a decent speech. And I think that Mia Motley, while she could have shown us her charisma, she should have written a speech so that she could have been better organized. Her speech was rambling, and she went from Michael Manley, her experience with him on a personal level, to the fact that, she was this climate change advocate, because I don't know how the climate change actually came into that speech, because she talked about the whole climate justice and the whole matter of climate crisis. I think that people should have challenged her on that, in terms of why was she really emphasizing climate justice and the climate crisis, when a lot of what Michael Manley talked about in terms of the huge gap between the rich and the poor, between the countries of the global north and the countries of the global south, are so wide. And when I speak about gap here, I'm talking about the wealth gap, the development gap is so wide. And these are the issues that Michael Manley confronted and that he challenged, but he was silenced for doing in the 1970s. Remember now that we cannot speak about the 70s without speaking about the influence of the CIA. Clearly, Mia Motley, this very astute and courageous and brave politician, would not have dared to have gone down the path of the CIA, and how the CIA might have, interrupted and really damaged the Jamaican economy under Michael Manley's leadership. Of course, his former wife, that's Beverly Anderson Manley, his ex-wife, let me be careful here, she actually tends to highlight that. In fact, Beverly Manley was on a podcast recently, in which she talked about the fact that some of the unclassified files in the United States are about to be declassified, and that the classified files, I should say, not the unclassified, but the classified files are about now to be declassified, and people are not going to get access, in terms of what happened in the 1970s and how the CIA might have derailed Michael Manley's economic and political progressive programs, his progressivism. Progressivism. That's the word. Now, the fact is that Mia Motley finds herself in a time where the entire economic infrastructure is being, advocated for neoliberalism. People tend to think that neoliberalism is the only economic solution to solving our, poverty levels, and also to usher us into a new world, into a new world order. But, since the 1990s, I should say, when that political economic system came into full gear, we have realized that it has not worked. And that is what happened. That's what actually created the financial meltdown of 2008, when you had Wall Street, melting down there and the US economy plunging into what is now called the Great Recession. That is what gave the birth. That was the root cause of that economic meltdown. Now, Mia Motley did not address these factors and these things and how the economic meltdown of the 2008 affected Caribbean nations in terms of their debt, in terms of the wide gap between the rich and the poor, which has been getting wider since 2008. There is this huge gap, and that is what also has resulted in the broad sweep, the victory that Donald Trump had recently in 2024 US elections, because people saw that in the United States, even in what is known to be the wealthiest economy, people realized that neoliberalism is not working for the average Joe, not even for the middle class. And some of us think that we're middle class and it doesn't affect us and all of that. It is going to affect you. It's already affecting you. You can't see it yet until you lose your job or until the dollar comes tumbling down upon us and we have nothing and no way of getting out of that particular economic crisis. But we must understand that neoliberalism is something that is going to lead back most of our nations or world's population back to the slave plantation. Not only Blacks, but people in general will become peons. They will become slaves in their own country. Now, Mia Motley, let us move on to some of the great things that have been said about her, particularly in the Western media, right? It's her darling. Now, if Mia Motley, my question is, if Mia Motley was the Michael Manley of the 21st century, right, of 2024 and beyond, why wouldn't the CIA, why wouldn't the people try to unseat her? Why aren't we seeing that sort of destabilization effort and attempts that happened in Jamaica during the 70s under the Michael Manley-led administration? Those are questions we have to ask ourselves. Now, has the CIA changed? I don't think so. And when you look at other governments, when you look at even Trump, who is in the United States, and the fact that they went for him because he was actually speaking out. Not that he's doing, but he's actually speaking out for the working class. And the elites in the United States does not even want the conversation. The elites do not, I shouldn't say. The elites do not even want an open and transparent conversation about what is happening and the whole neoliberalism and how that is shaping the IMF and the World Bank, and all this Washington consensus is destroying people's jobs and their livelihoods. They don't even want a debate to happen. And that is why we saw where they were strident that Trump would not have gone back to office, and they were going to ramp up charges against him, even though some of them were false, that he should not go back. Now, Mia Motley, this is the Time magazine here. This was written on May 23rd, 2022. There are some who stand tall and stand out no matter where they are from, whether a large, densely populated country or a small island nation. Prime Minister Mia Motley of Barbados is one such person, bold, fearless, and possessing a great intellect and wit. The Prime Minister is brilliant. He's a brilliant politician who knows how to shake things up. Since she was a young woman growing up in the Caribbean, Mia Motley has always cared deeply about critical issues impacting the world. From poverty to debt to climate change, she is a vocal advocate on the world stage for responsible stewardship of our planet, so that nations large and small and people rich and poor can survive and thrive together. At COP26 in Glasgow, late last year, she chided the world's leaders for not working more diligently to limit the potential catastrophic, impacts of climate change, telling them to try harder. While chair of the World Bank, so she was chair of the World Bank. Mia Motley was chair of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. While chair of the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund's Development Committee, she reminded the world's finance gurus that the level of a country's per capita income may not always be the best measure of its wealth. After all, one climate change-induced hurricane can take a significant toll on that wealth. So I have done a lot of reading on Mia Motley, and that is what she's all about. She's about climate change. So when she speaks about social justice, she's speaking about it in that sort of light. And is the climate change agenda an agenda for working for the working class? I leave you to answer that question, and you have to do your own research, because there are certain things that are not allowed to say or allowed to say on this platform. So you have to look at if this climate change rather, the climate crisis that Mia Motley speaks about, because she doesn't talk about climate change anymore. It has been, she has raised the conversation a notch higher, in which she's saying now that it's a climate crisis. It is this apocalyptic understanding that if we do not deal with the crisis right now, the climate crisis right now, we are all going to die. I think we heard about that during 2020, during what you call the COVID-19, right? And all of the drama that surrounded that event, right? So we're hearing now that the climate has to be dealt with. If it's not dealt with, we are all going to die. And we have the resources, we have the capacity, even though we are weaker and we are inferior to the climate, but they're talking about climate justice, right? And this is what we have to understand. Now, what did she say about Michael Manley? But before I go there to what she says, let us look at Mark Golding, who is the leader and the president of the People's National Party in Jamaica, and a party that Michael Manley was also leader and president of when he was alive. And look at what he's saying about what Michael Manley's, his stewardship of the Jamaica's economy. Something that is, is incredible, and something that we have to learn to look at in terms of seeing where our leaders are taking us to. All right, on what path are they leading us? Let us go now and see here.
There's no doubt that Michael Manley was a most consequential Caribbean political leader. He was truly a Jamaican Renaissance man, a passionate intellectual with a wide range of interests, including a deep love of sports, art, and music. His oratory and charm were unparalleled, and I believe it's safe to say that he is the most loved political leader Jamaica has produced.
Yes, and he's most loved because the large majority of the population really don't know the man. I think they just saw him and they embraced his oratorical skills. The fact that he was charismatic and he was able to hold a large audience. Not only that, even though he was not coming from their class, and he could not, connect with them in terms of understanding the plight, right? The plight of poverty that gripped the working class in Jamaica, the poverty stricken in Jamaica. But even though he could not really identify with that sort of suffering, but he was able to connect on a broader sense in terms of understanding. He was able to give you a touch and a hug, which many Jamaicans were sort of mesmerized by Michael Manley's mesmerizing demeanor. But, when you look beyond the veil, you realize that in many ways, Michael Manley was a man, right? And he had the frailties, and he's finite, just like any human being. And in some cases, he was confused about what would have been the best way for Jamaica's development. And sometimes he was limited in his understanding. However, what we should give him credit for is that whatever principle or conviction he stood for, he remained and he championed those causes, irrespective of his detractors and what his critics would say. And that is what we need. We need that sort of tenacity of spirit by our politicians, a lot of times who do not have any personal convictions. Many of them they're just riding with the wind, right? That is what they do, and they really don't have any personal convictions. But Michael Manley did. And one of the things about him and the politicians of his generation is that they read, and they read extensively. Our politicians today are not readers per se, and they're just going with the flow, and they're just going by what the elites tell them to do, and they have no sort of saying, hey, yes, you might want that, but what is going to happen to the country and to the rest of the majority of the people? Our politicians don't, they just want to get rich. They have just one desire. Many of our politicians, including Mark Golding and Andrew Holness, all they want to do is to enrich themselves, their friends, and their families. Wow, I'm sorry about that. Let me get back onto, I touched the wrong button. And that is what happens when you talk too much. All right, so let's get on with the program.
And with the benefit of hindsight, he is increasingly recognized as a visionary leader whose ideas for creating a more fair and just society out of the cauldron of our colonial experience were often before their time. Michael Manley was courageous. He recognized that incremental adjustments to the status quo would not meet the needs and expectations of the majority of Jamaicans. And he was always willing to take bold steps towards the positive transformation of the society and indeed the world. From lying down in the road as a trade union leader in furtherance of the JBC workers' protest, to standing up to Henry Kissinger and our mighty neighbor to the north on a matter of principle when pressured to abandon Cuba in its military support of the liberation struggle of the Angolan people against the invasion of the apartheid regime in South Africa.
What's his name here? Mark Golding is doing a fantastic job in terms of giving a concise view of what the mettle of the man, Michael Manley, was. When you look, we're going to just juxtapose him, and you're going to see the difference between he and Mia Motley. Mia Motley did not go into these things. So, I mean, after this man's speech and what others had to say, like the PJ Pattersons about Michael Manley, the lecture could have ended, because Mia Motley's, her protestations, her assertions were just really there about herself and about climate change. But here we're seeing things, and yet still there are deeper things that should have been touched on. But he's doing a good job in terms of giving us a synopsis of who Michael Manley was. Of course, not very deep, still superficial, but yet it is credible. It's something, what he's saying can spark an interesting debate, an interesting conversation, an interesting dialogue that we need in Jamaica so greatly about Michael Manley. Okay, let me continue. Not pressing the wrong button.
Michael was courageous. During his first period as Prime Minister from 1972 to 1980, Michael's policies and programs were developed through a democratic socialist ideological lens. This necessitated far-reaching changes to Jamaica's economy and society, which, a decade after political independence, had continued to be structured along strict classist and race-configured colonial norms.
Which it still does.
Over the course of those 8 years, Jamaica was deeply transformed in profound ways never attempted, much less achieved, either before or since.
Well, he's talking about Jamaica was transformed, but he's not saying to an extent in terms of the social policies, in terms of maternity leave and free access to education and healthcare, and among other things, right? Yes, those policies were revolutionary for the time in which Jamaica was operating. However, in terms of our economy, we went backward, because we know that many of the capitalists Many of the people who were the root of the economy that formed the foundation, the foundation builders, the economic foundation builders, they immigrated, many of them never to return, and which plunged Jamaica into deeper levels of poverty. And every time we have successive middle class and people leaving the country, it makes the country poorer. Somebody was asking me the other day, if people are leaving, if these middle class people are leaving, then it means therefore that the country is not getting poorer. Yes, you can see it, but definitely the country will get poorer, because if you have the brightest minds, the engineers, the doctors, the teachers who are excellent, the nurses, if you have these people leaving, and all of these people, whether even the mechanics and the plumbers, because everybody is important to building the nation, then the country is going to be poor. It is evidently going to be poor, and it's something nonsensical to be asking the question that the fact that we're having a huge brain drain, it means therefore that the country is not going to be poor because those people won't be able to be plunged into poverty. It's nonsense, right? It's nonsense. The fact that they're leaving is because the country has already been plunged into poverty. Okay.
In support of the rights and interests of workers, of women, of children born out of wedlock,
right,
and so much more.
Mm-hmm.
The influence of Michael's thought and mission reverberated across the region,
Mm-hmm.
and made him a towering third world figure on the world stage,
Mm-hmm.
as he advocated relentlessly for the emergence of a new international economic order,
right,
based on principles of equity,
Mm-hmm.
which would provide a more level playing field for post-colonial economies in trade, finance, and overall development.
Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, we have neglected that. There is no idea, there's no conversation about egalitarianism anymore and equity. That conversation has been totally eradicated. And I hope you understand that. What we have now is this neoliberal thing where we deregulate the market, where we have private, corporations taking over government, what was public government institutions, and they run it, in their interest and not in the interest of the masses. We must understand that. And we must begin to know that all of Michael Manley's, what he was fighting for, that truck of economic development is in the not the garbage, but is in the park. It's in the garage. And I don't think that truck will ever be resuscitated, will ever be fixed and ready to continue on its path of development. I think that we've long moved away from that. And Jamaicans are largely ignorant of Jamaica's history and politics. And the two are intertwined, by the way. We must study the history and we have to study the politics. And it's more than just listening to a lecture that's coming from the Mark Goldings and the Mia Motleys of the world.
In the second half of the 1970s, the backlash to this transformation that was instigated by the political representatives of the privileged status quo in Jamaica, aided by their external Cold War backers, was relentless and severe, resulting in a concerted propaganda war against his government and the intensification of political violence as a tool of destabilization, ultimately resulting in the bloody 1980 general election defeat of the People's National Party.
Correct.
While a lot has been said and written about aspects of that period of our history, much of what took place has remained untold, other than in private conversation.
Absolutely.
Such is the vestigial, unresolved impact of that era on the nation's consciousness.
Correct.
While that 8-year-old period of Michael Manley's career in government generally attracts
not to cut, I think that we have romanticized that history and we have only looked at the positive impact, but we have not really delved into the negative impact. And we have not really spoken about ways in which we experience defeat and how we could have channeled that defeat into into better sort of gains, you know. I think we have to have a more transparent dialogue, an open, objective dialogue. But we tend to idolize too much Michael Manley. Michael Manley was a normal human being. What we have to look at are his policies and to see where the policies were good, where they were effective, or how they could have been better refined, and some of them that should have been thrown out. All right. That is how we should be judging the mettle of the man. But we tend to idolize our politicians too much. As a result of that, we are failing as a society because we do not have the intellectual honesty and we do not have the intellectual competence to do that sort of work. A lot of that work is being done outside of the Caribbean in the United States by non-Jamaicans and a few Jamaicans who are a little bit more honest, right, and who are not partisan in their political orientation.
Nostalgically, as the heyday of progressive achievement in Jamaica, his second period as Prime Minister from 1989 to 1992 was also very consequential.
Correct.
In fact, certainly in terms of economics, the latter period had a more lasting impact than the first.
Wow.
Part two of Michael Manley in government established the...
So he is here. Mark Golding has the tenacity to suggest here that Michael Manley's his third term, so been the third term, because remember now that he was in the presidency from 1972 to 1976. That was his first term. And then he won the election again from 1976 to 1980. That was his second term. And when he came back now to office in the third term, as he said, from 1989 to 1992, when he demitted office due to illness, that third term was Michael Manley's most consequential, and that is the era that has a more lasting impact. It means, therefore, that whatever gains were made in the 70s, right? Whatever gains were made under the Michael Manley's administration in the 1970s were totally annulled, eradicated during his third term. Because that is what he's suggesting, and it is true. What this guy is saying, what Mark Golding is saying is true, right? And you have to just go and read the history. But Michael Manley now, the free marketeer, the neoliberal politician, had been transformed, and he was now embracing the policies of the Washington Consensus. Very important that we understand that.
Basic economic model that Jamaica has been pursuing for the last 40 years. He recognized the essential role of business in driving economic growth and rapidly liberalized the economy through removing exchange controls, eliminating price controls, and substantially getting rid of the licensing regimes for imports and exports. All this was in...
Say no more, right? Say no more. Mark Golding does not need to utter another word, because what he's here suggesting are all the neoliberal policies that Michael Manley implemented. And I understand that Mark Golding, was one of his advisors, just like the Peter Buntings. Very young, young men at the time, but they had inordinate influence on the then Michael Manley's administration in terms of the economic policies. And I'm sure that the Kamala Harris's father, also Donald Harris, would have been instrumental, right, in helping Michael Manley to formulate policies for the sustenance of the Jamaican economy. You know, so here Mark Golding can say and get away with what he's saying because of the illiteracy and the semi-literacy of Jamaicans, including people at the University of the West Indies. He can get away with what he's saying because they just allow it to ride over because, yeah, it's Michael Manley. All we can remember is that he was a trade unionist and that he was standing for equal rights and maternity leave, and he is a person who embraces egalitarianism. That's the Michael Manley that we want to remember and that we want to embrace. We have thrown out, right? And we're having political amnesia, as it were. We are demented. We are suffering from political dementia when we talk about Michael Manley of the third term in 1989 to 1992, and the fact that the toxic policies which the then Michael Manley government implemented in Jamaica created was at the foundation, laid the foundation for the FinSac debacle, right? Hope you are making the connection, because that is the sort of conversation that the Mia Motleys and the Mark Goldings should be having. And then the ensuing debates as a result of those things. And we're not trying to hear castigate Michael Manley. Michael Manley is a person like you and I. He had to survive. He had to live within the times. You and I are living within the time. Look at Barack Obama. He had this progressive agenda before he went into politics, what he was going to do and what he was not going to do, right? And when he went to Washington, D.C., he realized that the reality was not so, that what he had were just mere ideologies in his head, and that the real world and the real issues with which he had to contend, it was not this kumbaya. He could not have had this kumbaya personality. He had to embrace the doctrines of Wall Street and the military-industrial complex. And so did Michael Manley. He had to eventually embrace the Washington consensus ideology, or he would not have been able, not only him, but his party, that's the PNP, the People's National Party, would not have had, they would not have been able to survive if they had not accepted, and the country could have been totally decimated, right? As in 2012, when they told Dr. Peter Phillips and the people there in Washington, D.C., let Jamaica burn. Let Jamaica burn. If they don't want to accept the IMF policies, the stringent austere, or the stringent austerity, economic austerity, then let Jamaica burn. Because what is Jamaica to the world? Right? You think you're little about Talawa, but these people don't even think you are. They don't think you are important. All right? You've got to wake up. Okay, so we are looking now at what did Mia Motley, who I thought her speech was, very disappointing to say the least, and not very eloquent, right? She could have sat and she could have done more reflection on Michael Manley's. But I don't think it would have helped her, because she was there to promote her climate change agenda. And had she really questioned and critiqued Washington's policies in Jamaica, she perhaps probably would lose her position. She's running to be, or she is a contender, a future contender for Secretary General of the United Nations, which the United States control, practically, right? Okay, let's listen to the so-called brave intellectual. I don't think she's an intellectual, but, the brave Mia Motley. So let me go here now to look at what she has to say. This is your girl, right? This is your girl.
For 14 years. But you may be forgiven to believe that that may be the reason why I'm here alone. The truth is that as a very young child, in fact, in first form, I first got my first set of, I almost say bullying, from the sixth formers in Queen's College, from sitting on the sixth form veranda. I had the audacity to do so. But I was walking with a book, and they pulled the book from me to see what I was reading. And disappointed that it was not Mills and Boons or Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew, they then continued to rail me, because the book was The Politics of Change by Michael Manley.
Impressive, isn't it?
I did not touch it again as a whole book until last Thursday, and reread it. And throughout this afternoon, we'll continue to reflect and better understand as an adult how much of what I came to represent and believe in was effectively shaped in those very early years in understanding the writings and the beliefs of Michael Manley. But there is one other story that I will share before getting into the meat of the occasion.
Yeah, so she shared anecdotal stories, right? That was what her thing was all about. And it morphed into then the climate crisis agenda. Boring, right? Nothing that sparked any imagination. Let us say, for example, that there were young people there who had not really heard about Michael Manley before. They could not have listened to Mia Motley and got an idea, some idea, and their appetites would not have been, whetted, as it were, to wanting to go and delve more into Michael Manley. In fact, as I suggested previously, that Mark Golding's brief, assertions, intimations were more astute, were more intellectual, and more erudite than what Mia Motley presented. It was very disappointing for coming from a person who was highly erudite and intellectual. That was Michael Manley. I think that Mia Motley should have gone. She should have sat down and she should have reflected on the mettle of this man. You can't just go and speak off the cuff. You have to speak intelligently about this man. Now, we're not trying to idolize him, but because of the grandiosity and the grandiloquence, I should say, of the man's philosophies, you've got to really read it. And even though I've read the book Politics of Change 3 times, if I were to deliver a speech, I would have to go back through the books again. Because you want to reflect and you want to be able to make certain applications. You want to be able to spark an intellectual debate about the mettle of this man called Michael Manley. But she didn't. And because she occupies she has this global presence, Jamaicans were there in awe of what she said. Because she is courageous and she is speaking truth to power. What truth is Mia Motley speaking to power? May I ask? What truth is she speaking to power? And why is she so, so friendly with the global elites? Why aren't they attacking her? Why is the Times, for example, the Times newspaper, saying about her these wonderful stories about her? And there are lots of other papers. Let us go into some, because I'm not going to take you into Mia Motley's speech. It was rather disappointing. But, there is a writer here from the Black Agenda Report, right? It's a Black newspaper, progressive newspaper, left-wing newspaper in the United States, all right? So this is, has to do with the blackness, right? So you can't say some white people writing about her, right? This is a Black, agenda report, the Black Agenda Report. And I really respect the work coming from them a lot of times. You might agree with everything they say, but you have to say they do some really good commentary. Now, the Black Agenda Report, they had this to say about your girl, right? Mia Motley. The mirage of Mia Motley's progressive politics. The mirage. Mia Motley of Barbados, of the Barbados Labour Party, was sworn in as Prime Minister of the Republic of Barbados for a second consecutive term. And that is what you need to understand. When she came to office, when she won the prime ministership, when she became Prime Minister of Barbados in 2018, do you know that she won all 30 seats in Parliament? All 30 seats. Not even one was won by the Democratic Labour Party. If that happened in Jamaica, what would we think? If the PNP or the JLP won all the parliamentary seats? How would that have worked out? How would that work out in Jamaica? I don't know. But she won all these seats. And in 2022, again, when she went back to becoming Prime Minister, was it 2021 or 22? Thereabout, her second term now, she also won 30 seats, but she gave up one. When they saw it was so embarrassing, they gave one of the seats to the opposition. Very interesting lady. You know, and you really wonder, how is that a democracy? How is Barbados a democracy when she is, you know, shepherding a political ship over which she is actually a dictator in terms of the fact that she has no real opposition in parliament. She has them in name, but not in action. Despite the praise she receives for being the progressive leader needed in the Caribbean, Mia Motley and her policies in Barbados and her work within CARICOM have not veered outside the realm of neoliberal politics in any way. Because she has to do, that's what she has to do. If she wants to be chummy with the global elites and to get her position and to look as she's important and, you know, and be like the Kamala Harrises, having no personal convictions, then you have to do what you're told. You have to do what you are told. Mia Motley, the current Prime Minister of Barbados, has emerged as one of the leaders of the Global South in the 21st century in a world riddled by intersecting and worsening ecological, economic, political, and social crises. Her rise to international repute has come at a time of shifting global power dynamics with the recent expansion of the BRICS, the Chinese challenge to Euro-American hegemony, the so-called progressive turn of politics in Western democracies, popularizing new Green Deals, climate and workers' movements, demanding transformative change and greater shares of economic gains following the COVID-19 pandemic. At the same time, xenophobic and far-right nationalisms are resurging across Western societies, including movements supposedly fighting against white replacement and anti-racism. Mia Motley has even been touted as a possible top contender for the job of the United Nations Secretary General, whose election coincides with the end of her term as Prime Minister of Barbados. Right? So do you know actually call the election before the time? I think it was called 6 months before the time, or a year or so before the constitutionally due date in Barbados, because she had just given the nation a Republican status, and she thought it was time for her to, you know, get her votes, and which she did, and she won a decisive election. She actually came out, you know, a very, you know, strong victor. But what is radical about Mia Motley's climate proposals and the proposed reforms of the international financial system? Is she the leader the world needs and the radical movements have been calling for at this current moment? How do these international proposals for climate justice match her record as a Caribbean politician? Her record and proposals need to be evaluated on their own merits, especially since many who have praised and welcomed her speeches pay very little to the domestic or regional politics. Right? They don't understand what is happening in the Caribbean. They don't understand what is happening in Barbados. Right, and today I read an article about how the Barbados, I'm going to read to you the Barbadians and the educated people in Barbados. They do not like to question the status quo. They just remain there. They don't want to be pilloried. They don't want to be ostracized, as it were. So they remain on the periphery and they just remain silent. And I think to a large extent, Jamaicans are like that too. Because if you question, oh, he's crazy, he doesn't have any sense. He's a conspiracy theorist. He's angry, right? And that is how people are described when they question the status quo, right? That's how it is today. And many people, they're not strong enough. They don't have the intellectual honesty, and they don't have the moral dexterity to be able to stand up. In Barbados, Motley remains popular despite the fact that her policies have shafted Black working class Barbadians. In 2021, she led her country to become a Republican state, which decided using its parliamentary majority to remove the British monarch as head of state. This decision was widely praised locally and regionally. However, a closer look at her domestic actions reveals an insidious and nefarious underbelly of a firmly committed neoliberal politician. On the cusp of taking office in 2018, listen to this. As the first female Prime Minister of Barbados, she announced a decision to retrench more than 1,000 Barbadian public sector workers. This number has expanded to more than 1,500 today. This retrenchment program has disproportionately affected more women than men. So she's a woman, and people were saying they were against her because she was her detractors. Some people would say the ones who were her critics or detractors was because they don't like women. But look at what they're saying here. This retrenchment program has disproportionately affected more women than men, and she's a woman. While under the severe constraints of an International Monetary Fund program that was initiated since 2013, I didn't know that the program was instituted since 2013, I thought it was 2018. Mottley nonetheless has praised the implementation and effects of this program, labeling it a homegrown program, stating in 2022 that it has worked for us while exaggerating that the economic situation has improved by 500%. And when she was in Jamaica giving the Michael Manley lecture, she boasted on the Jamaican politicians that her economic policies, her IMF policies were very, very progressive. And they were able to lift Barbadians out of poverty. And she created wonderful things in Barbados under her stewardship, of course, with the IMF. She never critiqued the IMF. She never said that they were neoliberal institutions. It was a neoliberal institution, and she never even ventured to talk about how the IMF derailed lots of Michael Manley's economic policies. She didn't, because she couldn't. Because as we learned previously, she was on the board of the World Bank and the IMF. How could she speak up against these people? Motley's first 2 years of office showed her committed interest in deepening the enmeshment of Barbados in the global neoliberal tourism economy. Indeed, her administration still wants to aggressively build hotels on the entire stretch of the Carlisle Bay, a small natural harbor located in the southwest region of Barbados and the site of the most popular beaches that working class Barbadians use. Right? And there are lots of things here that we can talk about. Look at what they're saying here. The Mottley-led Barbados Labour Party, that's what is called BLP government, has also divested from state-owned enterprises, reform the public pension system to make it more efficient, is reviewing labor laws and the aim of increasing flexibility, that is to fire people more easily, increased regressive taxation, and has even floated the idea of increasing the pensionable age from its current 60 years to 68 years, anticipated in 2034 rather. As a result, the minimum number of years one has to work before receiving a pension will increase from 10 to 15 years, and the qualifying age for reduced pension is going from 60 to 63. The savings from layoffs were estimated to be about 2% of its gross domestic product, its GDP. These actions are all common ingredients in the neoliberal economic recipe, right? While we cannot discount the forceful role of the IMF in maintaining the neoliberal economic policies, we equally cannot discount how committed, based on her recent utterances, Mottley, as a matter of fact, by the extension, the entire Caribbean Miss Leadership class remains to these reforms that impose persistent austerity and worsen inequality and hardship on the working class Barbadians, or on working class Barbadians. Mottley has not changed inequality among working class Barbadians, nor has she challenged the tiny white elite that controls the majority of the wealth in that country. Right? So this about her being this egalitarian, right? And one who is an advocate for working class people in the region, in the Caribbean region, Latin America, and the world at large, is false. Right? It is false. It is mendacious. It is not true. Right? She is not the Michael Manley of the Caribbean. Mia Motley is no Michael Manley. She's no Renaissance woman. She's no progressive leader. She is a neoliberal leader. And that is her agenda. And we could see there that Mark Golding equally is a neoliberal leader, and he stated that Michael Manley's third term was his most consequential, his most impactful in terms of the impact it has had on the Jamaican economy, which have sent us into a depression from the 1990s, out of which we have never come out of. Yeah. That is why we're seeing the level of criminality and the level of destitution, and that Jamaica is the second or the third highest nation in terms of brain drain, as people run either for their safety or to seek greener economic pastures. We've got to talk about these things. We've got to engage ourselves in open, transparent conversations, which we are not, and which we're afraid of doing, because we know that if we begin these very complex discussions, that we are going to rattle the feathers. We're going to ruffle, as it were, not to rattle, but to ruffle the feathers of the Jamaican economic elites and their global partners, of course. So we have to be careful. But let's look at there is an article here from ProPublica. I don't think I want to make this video too long, so I might have to end it here. Let me just see if I could choose something from the ProPublica. Yeah, I think I might have to do this another time, because the video is going to be too lengthy. So I don't want to make it too lengthy. I have lots of things to share with you, but Barbados Prime Minister Mia Motley is the new voice of the developing world, and this is coming from Reaction. Let me see if I can share this with you. So the world has seen her. Let me see if I could share this with you. There's so much I have to share with you. There's lots, and I have a lot of things on the screen, and there are lots of things I have not placed on the screen. It was going to be too long a video. Too lengthy a video. The world has noticed Mia Motley too, motivated by her personal outrage at the unequal and uneven distribution of COVID-19 vaccines between the developed and developing world. Motley gave an inspired speech at the United Nations General Assembly in September 2021, in which she called for global leadership around inequality and climate change. This morphed into the Bridgetown Initiative, which Motley's government issued ahead of COP27 last year. Now, she is, she's also very friendly with President Ruto, who is the Prime Minister or President of Kenya, who also is involved in the whole Haitian crisis. But there's an article here written in the Barbados here, and I think this article was sort of supporting her leadership, but at the same time asking some very troubling and unsettling questions. So let's see if we can go through it a little and end the video here. So we have this is coming from Barbados Today, and the boogeyman of dictatorship. So many people claim that, she's a dictator. And if you don't know, I understand that her advisor, political advisor, as it were, she was the protege of an author, and he also described her as a dictator. He described Mia Motley as a despot, not a dictator, but as a despot. That was his exact word. That Mia Motley. He spoke about Mia Motley, the despot. That was an author who actually, whom she replaced as the leader and president of the Barbados Labour Party. That's, another conversation, but there are lots of things happening with Mia Motley. I can't really get into the complicated nature of this woman. Now, let's look here where we have the boogeyman of dictatorship has haunted Barbadian politics from the time of Grantley Herbert Adams to the present premiership of Mia Motley. In Barbados, it is invariably used as a scare tactic by opposition parties to ostensibly damage the reputation of the leader of a ruling class or ruling party. Dictatorship, of course, has an almost universally negative connotation. Historically, it is associated with leaders such as Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, Pol Pot in Cambodia, Papa Doc de Valère in Haiti, and perhaps most infamously with Joseph Stalin in Russia. The stories of secret police, gulags, and torture are well known. They all represent an affront to humanity, to God, and a reflection of the degradation of the human condition in the absence of moral sensibility, I would say. I don't think of there. Let us see, though, what he's saying here. He's saying that the idea that Barrow was a dictator was compounded by equally false accusation that he was a communist. Nothing could be further from the truth. Neville Duncan noted in 1987 that Barrow liked to call himself a socialist, but that he was more of a social democrat tied to the workings of a free market economy. The notion of Barrow as a potential communist dictator was, to say the least, farcical. Now, listen to what the writer is saying here, because he's cementing the whole understanding that, many Barbadians, historically, they have said that their prime ministers have been dictators. The dictatorship charge was also leveled as, I don't want to go into all that. I want to get where Motley is. The charge of wanting to be a dictator has surfaced again under the leadership of Miss Mia Motley. I say wanting to be because there is little evidence to suggest that the Prime Minister is embarked on any such odyssey. Right? So he's not necessarily agreeing or disagreeing. Of course, one does not have to see evidence to raise a cautionary note in the interest and the defense of democracy if it appears that democracy could come under threat in the near or distant future. In Miss Mia Motley's case, the suspicion might hold because, unlike her predecessors, her government holds more than the required 2/3 majority for any change to the Constitution. So she has dictatorship there. Whether she is a dictator or not, her politics, the power that she holds in the Barbadian parliament is that of a despot, in which she doesn't have any active, robust opposition, because she holds the large majority of the seats, 29 out of 30. And in her first term in 2018, she held all 30 seats. Amazing. Yet, this is the Mia Motley that was asked to give a lecture on the likes of our Prime Minister, or esteemed former Prime Minister of Jamaica, Michael Manley. That is how the show is run, and we've got to get wise. We've got to educate ourselves. We've got to inform ourselves about our political leaders, not to attack them, but to delve into their convictions and into their actions, as it were, what they're doing, their policies. We must. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you'd like, share, and subscribe. I look forward to seeing you in another video. Remember now that you need to like the video for the video to be shared with as many people on the platform. See you in another one. Subscribe. All the best to you. See you then. Bye.